Hi there, Smart Drivers. Rick with Smart Drive Test, the fourth installment of driving as a professional career here. Just getting ready here. So today we're going to talk about truck driving. We're definitely going to give you some very valuable information if you're thinking of going into the truck driving industry and you're going to start truck driving and some of the options that are available to you. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Stick around for that story. We'll be right back. Hi there, Smart Drivers. Rick with Smart Drive Test. We're in the fourth day of lockdown, the fourth day of story time here on Smart Drive Test. We are talking about truck driving, CDL driving, the crashes that I had when I got my first license. We talked about that before I even got my license. I had a crash. Carrie's here from Minnesota. Colin is here. Hello. Michael Johnson is from Jackson, Michigan. And my friend Ryan from Regina. So, lots of people here. Yeah, back then in the early 1990s. It's hard to believe that the early 1990s was 30 years ago. It just boggles my mind. That saying that time speeds up when you get older. It definitely does. Tech King, how are you, my friend? Colin says this is fun to watch. So I told you the story about getting my license, and then I got kicked out of high school. I went back to high school, finished high school. And when it got accepted into university, the University of Western Ontario, where I figured out that it was going to take me a considerable amount of time kind of dropping out and going off and driving truck and whatnot. And so eventually one summer I was working for a company, Atlas Van Lines, out of London, Ontario, and that's where I had the opportunity to get my truck driving license. And I did get my truck driving license that summer. I didn't go to truck driving school. If you've listened to the other stories and whatnot, I had tons of farm experience. I'd been working on the farm since I was 14. So by the time I got to trucking, I already had 10 years of experience of driving heavy equipment and whatnot. And a lot of people who go into trucking who have a background in construction or they have a background in farming, those types of things are going to find learning how to drive a truck fairly easy because they are already able to deal with the size of the vehicle and those types of things. And that's what I found was fairly easy. So for me, it was, a little bit of learning how to back up the truck and learning to do the pre-trip inspection and whatnot, and was successful in getting my license that summer. The furniture moving thing was my first entry into the truck driving industry, and as well, a very short stint as an owner-operator because I rented a truck and worked for the moving company that summer as an owner-operator. And moving furniture is hard work. It's, you're moving furniture all day and then you end up driving all night. And you kind of mess with your logbook a little bit. And, learned a lot about driving truck and about what trucks were capable of and those types of things. I remember my first shift, I missed going up a hill and learning how to hill shift. Not something you do in Ontario. Northern Ontario, there are some hills and whatnot. Not like driving here in British Columbia where knowing how to run hills is a requirement, and it's something that we used to teach in truck driving school. Missed a shift, the truck came to a stop on the hill. But it's something that all novice drivers, all rookies go through, that you got to figure out how to shift. You got to learn how to downshift. One of the other, I guess it wasn't really a crash, but one of the incidents that happened when I was moving furniture was we were heading to Northern Ontario, myself and the other guy, John, who was my swamper. And, I was exhausted. I've been moving furniture all day, loading the truck. And we're talking about a tractor trailer here. So that's a lot of furniture. And we're going to Northern Ontario. And I said to John, listen, you just got to hold the steering wheel and drive this thing up the road. Because I said, I need a couple hours of sleep. Otherwise, I'm going to fall asleep. So John climbed in behind the wheel and I said, listen, this is where we're going, blah, blah, blah. And for any of you who have driven in Northern Ontario, it's not an interstate. It's not well laid out. It's all 2-lane skinnies up through Northern Ontario over the top of Georgian Bay and whatnot. The long and the short of it, John got lost off on this road somewhere, and I didn't know where we were. And you have to realize that this is all before GPS. This is all before cell phones and whatnot. And we're in the middle of flipping nowhere on what looked like a logging road. I don't know how we up there. He missed a turn somewhere at a T intersection, which we figured out later. And So, we found this side logging road, and I said, we'll just turn the truck around and head back where we're going, because he didn't get too far before he woke me up and said, listen, I'm lost, which, was something that happens when you drive truck. And you learn very quickly that when you learn to drive truck, it's not like driving a car. You can't get lost. You get lost, and then you have to figure out how to turn this truck around, this 75 feet of vehicle. And my day of driving before GPS, not only did you have to find someplace to turn the truck around, but you had to find someplace to turn the truck around and find someplace with a payphone so that you could call and get directions and tell them where you were lost and try and reconfigure yourself. So that's what happened. So we decided to back this truck up down in this logging road, and it looked, it was dark, first of all, but it was just one of those things that went wrong in trucking. Backed it down on the site side. But what happened was is that when we backed it down, the trailer tilted like this, and it set down on the tires and ripped two of the I-beams underneath the frame, the subframe, from underneath the trailer. And that was just one of the many things, little incidents that happened. And we ended up strapping them back up to get to where we were going and those types of things. Just crazy things. Another time we're loading a truck full of furniture, and we're moving this woman out of Toronto up to Ottawa, and she's got these marble end tables and the tops of them. And what does she say to us? She says, don't break that. So what's the thing that happens? You break the marble tabletop, the matching. But that's all part of trucking. Stuff happens. A lot of stuff happens. So went, that finished up that job. Took the truck back. I didn't make any money that summer. Basically, I was working for the company. I was an owner operator. They had all the expenses and costs and fuel costs and insurance, and they put the plates on the truck and whatnot. And by the time I got finished, I basically walked away without any money at the end of the summer. It was very disappointing. So if you're ever thinking of starting as a truck driver, you're ever thinking of, becoming an owner operator and those types of things, make sure that you do your homework first. There's, it's not like in my day where there wasn't a whole lot of information, and it was difficult to access people who had information about becoming a truck driver and whatnot. Now in this day and age, there's so much information on the internet. So make sure that you do your research before you get into these things, because these things can cost you a lot of money. And time and energy if you make mistakes. Yes, you're going to make mistakes along the way, but there are ways to prevent that. So at the end of moving furniture and really kind of cutting my teeth in the trucking industry, I went to the Peterbilt dealership, and I had a relationship with one of the salespeople there, because that's who I rented the truck from, or leased the truck from that I had, which was a Volvo. And said to him, listen, I need a job. I need a truck driving job. So he hooked me up with this broker and this driver, Quebecois, named Leo. And so I remember the first night I waited actually out at the Peterbilt dealership for Leo to show up to come and get me on the first run out to Vancouver from Toronto. And had all my stuff. I'm thinking, I'm going to be in the truck by myself. I got all my stuff in the truck. First of all, I had way too much stuff. And so we get it all loaded into the Peterbilt 379, which is on the thumbnail, which is the truck that we had. It was a Peterbilt 379. And these trucks it was not a truck for team running. I mean, essentially, if you want to run team, well, let me back up and explain what team is. Team driving in a truck is two drivers in a truck driving nonstop. So they basically keep the truck running 24/7. One guy drives, one guy sleeps. One guy drives, one guy sleeps. Or, wife, husband team, those types of things. And this is basically what we did. We ran general freight for QuickX, the company QuickX, out of Toronto, from Toronto to Vancouver, British Columbia. It's a 2,700 mile run. Round trip, or one way, and then 2,700 miles back the other way. And from my experience, and I'll explain to you in more detail why the cab of the truck isn't big enough for two men's egos. And so got into Leo, and Leo knew that I didn't have a whole lot of experience in terms of driving, and he he was a tyrant. He was abusive. He yelled at me a few times. You know, said I couldn't go over 80 kilometers an hour, which is 50 miles an hour on, you know, the Trans-Canada Highway, which is in Northern Ontario. Most of the time we went through the States to go to Vancouver. It's much shorter. You're running the interstate all the way. Fuel's cheaper in the U.S. and those types of things. So most of the time we went through the States. But this one time, the very first run, he picked me up. He was pulling a Tridem, a 3-axle. And you can only run 80,000 on a tandem in the States. You know, triple axle trailers are not allowed. So we had to go through Canada with the triple axle. So he drove from Toronto to London to pick me up, which is 2.5 hours. And then we had to turn around and go back to Toronto because he had a triple axle trailer. And Janet saying that I've done Team Ontario to New Brunswick in a Pete with a 5-hour wait once arrived. So not the truck for that. No, it's definitely not the truck for that, Janet, at all. And the reason I say that, later we had a Freightliner, a condo, which has got a set of bunk beds in the bunk, and you can stand up between the seats. They're much more conducive to running team, as opposed to a goofy Peterbilt with a single bunk on it. So we ended up going through Northern Ontario. We get out to Vancouver, and basically the way that it worked with team driving for QuickX is that if you were laid over for more than 4 hours, so if they didn't get you a load within 4 hours, then they put you up in a hotel. And there was a hotel, and I believe the hotel in Vancouver was in Burnaby. And the other funny thing about this was the early 1990s, and Tim Hortons had not made it to Western Canada yet. I remember, you know, I was an advocate of Tim Hortons, loved Tim Hortons, because I was from Ontario. And I had to walk a couple of miles to go get a Tim Hortons coffee in Vancouver at that time. I mean, now there's a Tim Hortons on every corner in Vancouver, but at the time, it wasn't like that. And so they put us up in a hotel, and you didn't get your own room in the hotel. You had to share the room with your team driver. There were 2 double beds in the room, and he slept over there, and you slept in that bed. So, you know, that was a bit interesting, sleeping with a kind of a stranger, somebody you'd spent all this time in the truck with, one person driving, one person not driving. You know, and so I drove with Leo for a while, and Leo was an interesting character. You know, as I said, he was a tyrant, he was abusive, and he used to make up these stories that, you know, in the 1970s, he used to run truck in the States for the oil rigs, you know, the oil companies and big oil companies had these huge rigs and all this sort of thing and whatnot. Just these huge, you know, stories of, you know, mammoth proportion of all how he was so great and all the rest of it. And the rest of us used to sit in the hotel in the bar and drink beers, and we used to ask if Leo was so great and his life was so wonderful and he had all that money, what was he doing running team for 17 cents a mile for QuickX? You know, and I don't know what happened, but eventually they moved me off with some other driver. I don't know whether Leo requested it or whatnot. But, you know, it's tough, especially if you don't get along with the person that you're driving with. Then a couple of guys that I drove with, stories that they told. One guy was, you know, they were in Montana, stopped at the truck stop, and the one guy went in to get a shower, and the other guy didn't like him at all and just took his stuff, chucked it out in the right in the middle of the parking lot of the truck stop, and drove off and just left him there. And, you know, I can see that happening because I had a few fights with a couple of drivers and just did not get along with them at all. The only driver that I did get along with was Pierre, another Quebecois. And him and I actually had a good time, and we actually, you know, talking about another truck that was not conducive for running team, it was a cab over Freightliner. And for those of you may or may not know, cab overs have the flat front, and it wasn't a very big truck. It wasn't a condo either. Later, when I drove for another company, I did have a cab over condo, and you could stand up in the bunk on the doghouse. The doghouse is the cover that goes over the engine inside the cab and just takes up an incredible amount of room inside of the truck. So, you know, and one of the things you got to realize when you're running team is that, you know, the inside of a truck is not very big. I mean, you're probably talking the inside of the truck. What would you say, Janet, is the inside of the truck? 100 square feet? If 100 square feet maybe, and 2 guys are in there. You're eating your meals in restaurants. You're eating meals. You got a lot of food inside of the truck that you're eating. You know, stuff you can grab and snack. But you're stopping at truck stops, and with two drivers, one guy fuels the truck, and the other guy goes in and has a shower. And the next time you fuel up, the other guy fuels the truck, and the other guy goes in and has a shower. So that's the way that it works with team driving. And you know, sleeping in a moving truck with somebody else that you really don't, you know, you kind of trust isn't always fun. So team driving, and you know, the other guys, because you know it was kind of the same group of guys that always ended up at the same hotel, so you got to know the other drivers, the other team drivers that were driving truck out to Vancouver. And Billy was from Eastern Europe, and he owned the trucks, all of the trucks that the guys drove, the team trucks. And yeah, Janet said 100 square feet, if that, and she said it's definitely tight. It's very tight. And you know, you got to go to the bathroom. You got to have a pee. And, you know, people talk to me and ask me about that, whether I peed in a bottle. And I did pee in a bottle when I was driving truck. And it'll just get kind of gross for you for a minute here, because you got to pee. And talking about Pierre, Pierre used to get up in the cab over, and there was a footwell between the back of the passenger seat and the bed in the bunk. And he used to pee in a sandwich bag, and then he'd throw it out the window. And that happens a lot with truck driving. And I'll tell you the reason why. Driving a truck is not like driving a car. I mean, you know, you pull over to have a pee in a truck and go into a rest area or some truck stop or whatnot. You're looking at 20 minutes to a half an hour to get that truck in, get it parked, get stopped, go in, have a pee, and come back out. And this is the reason that drivers pee in bottles. And the other thing was, one time there was a 13-hour round trip from Cambridge, Ontario, where I worked down to Grand Rapids, Michigan. It's a 13-hour run. And one time I did the time test on peeing in a bottle or stopping and taking a break. And went down, stopped 4 times for the 13-hour run to have a pee, and it added an extra hour to the run. So there's logistical reasons why drivers pee in bottles. So yeah, that's the gross side of trucking, and this is the other thing that you got to deal with when you're team driving. So, you know, all of that aside, Epic says, for some trucks in the interstate highways in the U.S., you might be seeing big trucks, big bunk sleeper cabs. Were they common back then or not? Because they can be useful for team drivers over the road. Yes, Epic, a lot of the trucks now have really huge bunks on them. I mean, and some of the trucks in the 1990s were big as well. I mean, there were condos. They're called condos. The condos are trucks that have big bunks on them, and they have bunk beds so there's 2 beds in the bunk. And I went back to drive 3-4 years ago, 2016. I went back driving, and it was a Pete 579, a Peterbilt 579, and it was a beautiful bunk. I mean, it had a fridge in it. It was a big bed. It had bunk beds actually, and you know, I was on my own, so they were huge, huge bunks. And I mean, you know, they did have them then, but they weren't as common. And one of the guys that I did drive with, you know, because when I started, the truck just moved all the time. It was rare to have the truck stopped, and I can remember the first time we actually stopped in a truck stop, and we both slept in the truck for 6 hours before we took off again. That was so weird for me. That was so weird. I'm like, what? The truck's not moving. Why are we not going anywhere? Yeah, it was so weird. Okay, Farron, my friend Farron, who got up this morning when I was doing my live stream last night at 3 a.m. She got up at 3 a.m. I was doing it at 6 p.m. here. YouTube loves notifying me very late for your live streams. They set reminders for you, but YouTube loves immediately notifying me about videos from YouTubers I'm not even subscribed to. YouTube is flawed. Yeah, Farron, there are some problems with YouTube, no doubt, absolutely. Gordon, my friend, goodness, I wonder where Leo is now. He had some ego problems, that is for sure. Characteristics of a bully. Gordon, you have no idea how, oh my God. USA 1 was the name of his truck. He told us stories about working for the oil rigs. He had a huge Kenworth. He was a big Kenworth guy, even though we were driving a Pete 379, which was a beautiful truck. Don't get me wrong, it was a beautiful truck. he had all these stories about driving a Kenworth with the big trailers on, and there were three of them. He owned three trucks. He had a couple of other drivers, and they were down in California, and they had these dune buggies, and they had them all hooked up to the back of the semi-trailer. It's just USA 1. That's what he called his truck. Gordon, I knew one truck driver who had to urinate in a water jug due to pancreatic problem. Sometimes he confused that with the actual water jug. Hall Phase, YouTube sends notifications on a channel if you're not subbed. That's interesting. I didn't know that, Hall Phase, about not being subbed and sending out notifications. Gordon, just for those of you who may get into the trucking industry, I'll tell you the science of the pee bottle. For the guys, obviously not. Unfortunately, it's not going to work for the women, but use the tall 1 liter water bottles and cut the top out of it. Those work the best because you don't get splashback and you won't confuse it with anything else you got going on in the truck. And yeah, so Hall Phase, early 1990s. Okay, so like 1993, 1994. Mookie. Oh my God, yeah. You know, and I've heard some of those stories about guys being gross inside trucks. I think Pierre peeing inside the sandwich bag while I was in the truck driving down the road, and he's like 3 feet that way having a pee into a sandwich bag was probably the grossest thing. So let's get to the story that I was going to tell you. The team from the drive through hell. I ended up with this guy, because I'm new. I'm driving truck. I'm new. And I've been into this about 2 months. And the broker, the guy that I worked for, that I ended up moving to different trucks, put me in a truck with this guy who was illiterate. I mentioned this yesterday on the story, that him and he was supposed to have all this experience, this 20 years experience driving truck and those types of things. But, I didn't really see it. So anyway, pick up the load. We're taking off. We're going down through the States. We're going to Winnipeg from Toronto. And we're going through the States, and we come up through the Dakotas into Winnipeg. And we get into the Dakotas after we stopped at the truck stop and fueled up the truck. And it is snowing like a storm like you wouldn't believe. And got out, I stopped on the side of the road and got out. And there's like this much snow on the interstate going north. We get up to the border, clear the border, and there's no lights on at the border because the power's out, the electricity's out. And of course, I've never been through here before. I have no idea where I'm going except, following the maps and the signs and those types of things. Get out of the parking lot and I make a left-hand turn out onto the highway and didn't cut the turn wide enough and drop the trailer tires into the ditch, which there was a bit of a ditch there. Not really dangerous, just enough to get the truck stuck because there's enough snow and it was slippery enough on the roadway that just the trailer tires into the ditch got us stuck. So there we were in the middle of the road at the border, stuck in a snowstorm. So we climbed into the bunk. We were driving a condo at the time. We climbed into the bunk, went to sleep, woke up the next morning, and waited a couple hours, tried to call tow trucks and those types of things. Nobody was coming out because of the storm in Manitoba. And later, about an hour and a half later, 2 hours later, finally this tractor shows up and gives us a pull, right? And so the other guy is driving the truck. Tim was driving the truck. And we're going around this building. All of a sudden they look up and the corner of the building is very close to the front corner of the trailer. And I'm like waving at the tractor the driver in the tractor to try and get it on, to get it stopped. So finally we get the truck out, we head to Winnipeg, and it's blowing a gale, like it's blowing a blizzard. And, the roads are sheer ice, and we get into Winnipeg and back into the loading dock, and we need to unhook the trailer so we can go up to the truck stop and get some fuel and get showered. And this guy, like I said, Tim was supposed to have all of this experience. We went to unhook the fifth wheel on the back of the trailer and couldn't get the fifth wheel unhooked. It was a safety feature on the fifth wheel that you had to lift the handle up and then pull it out. And we couldn't figure this out. And nobody else could figure it out. The guys from inside the shop came out and tried to help us. And the guy other guy tried to help us and those types of things. None of it worked. And it took us like an hour to get the stupid fifth wheel to unhook. Finally, we figured out what it was. We went up, we had to wait like 6 hours for the trailer to get loaded. So we went up to the truck stop, hung out at the truck stop, had something to eat, had a shower and those types of things. And then we come back, we got the trailer and we headed over to Calgary. Well, then we get to Calgary and the load's delayed. So we're 2 days in Calgary. And so I go out, spend the day reading books, hanging out in coffee shops, wandering around Calgary. I'd never been there before and those types of things. And I come back to the hotel room, and he's in the hotel room doing things that are very inappropriate. So I quietly closed the door, and I said, I'll be back later. Maybe you could put your pants on. And so then finally we get a load out of Calgary into Vancouver. And so we leave the hotel in Calgary, and unbeknownst to me, I dropped my wallet on the floor and got kicked under the hotel bed. The trailer that we picked up from the other team that was going back to Toronto, the trailer tires slide on the trailer to change the weight distribution in the truck. And we're going over the mountains in the wintertime. And the tandems are right to the front of the trailer, and which means there's no weight on the back of the truck, was where you want the weight, on the back of the truck. So then we got to go into the mechanic shop, another 4 hours into the mechanic shop. We got to get them to fix so that the bogies on the back of the truck will slide. 4 hours later, we're heading over the mountains. We get into Vancouver, and then we're laid over again in Vancouver. And I'm just like, by this point, I'd made some friends in Vancouver over at the coffee shop, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to go hang out with my friends. And so I buggered off for the day, and I come back at the end of the day, and Tim says to me, he says, oh, I missed the load. We missed the load. I said, what do you mean we missed the load? He said, they called me, and I just said you were gone, and I didn't know where you were, so I just said to them that we weren't ready to go. And I was like, oh my God, really? So we ended up sitting there. We turned down a load, and as soon as you turn down a load with dispatch, they're just going to pass you over for whatever decent load they got going back home. And so he goes out that night, and there was a strip club attached to the hotel where we were. He goes over to the strip club, gets completely drunk, and I'm laying in the hotel in the middle of the night, or I'm in the hotel, and I hear him come in, and he's completely blotto. He's banging around in the room, and all of a sudden I look up, and he's standing in the corner, and he's urinating in the corner of the hotel room. And I just yelled at him. I go, Tim, go to the toilet. So he, stumbles into the toilet, goes to sleep. So the next day we didn't get a load, and I believe, it was like Wednesday or Thursday at this point. And so we finally got a load, but it was like a crap load. It was back through Canada. It was a drop in Thunder Bay. It was another drop in Timmins, a drop in Cochrane, and a drop in Sudbury, which is just the worst. Driving across Canada's on Trans-Canada Highway is terrible. It's not like driving on interstate in the U.S. at all. Not to mention we're going through Northern Ontario and making these drops. And so, I go off and make a phone call, come back, we get in the truck, and off we head. And we get into Thunder Bay on a Friday night. And we do the drop in Thunder Bay. And, oh, no, I know what happened. Yeah, this was the other thing that happened. We didn't make it right to Thunder Bay. The truck broke down on the way to Thunder Bay in Manitoba in the wintertime. And so it was fortunate that we were kind of in this, coffee shop restaurant place at 3 o'clock in the morning. The woman actually came down and let us use the phone. And then we called the mechanic. The mechanic came out. He was trying to boost the truck with the, with his pickup truck. Wouldn't work. And he's like, well, I got to go get the auto wrecker. He was like an hour and a half away. I tried to convince the broker. I tried to say to him, listen, just call Freightliner in Winnipeg. Have the truck towed to Freightliner Winnipeg, because this guy doesn't have a clue what he's doing. I said, he's just going to put 4 new batteries in it, and away we go. But it's not going to fix your problem. And yeah, that's exactly what he did. But they were gone for like 3 hours to go and get the wrecker, and I stayed in the truck. And I'll tell you, I darn near froze to death. I learned a valuable lesson about winter survival kits in the truck, because even if you got blankets and whatnot, it's still cold. So finally we get into Thunder Bay, we unload, it's a Friday afternoon, and then they want us to head off to Timmins. and we're delivering groceries at National Grocers in Timmins. And so the dispatch is trying to say to us, well, just go to Timmins and see if you can find the guys and get unloaded, because we weren't supposed to unload in Timmins until Sunday. And I said to him, I said, there's no way, there's nobody there. I said, it's National Grocers, it's Union, they're not going to be there. Sure enough, they weren't. And finally, I called the broker and I said, listen, you just need to put us up in a hotel until Sunday morning, and then we'll drive to Timmins, and then we can unload. So the broker knew exactly what I was talking about, and he did put us up in a hotel. But Tim's parents lived in Northern Ontario. He says, oh, we'll go there, and, you know, I can hang out with my parents for the day, and then we'll go down to deliver the load in Timmins. Okay, whatever. So we go to this place where he lives, and he leaves me in the truck for 5 hours while he goes and visits his family. And I was just like, oh, this did not work out at all. So finally Sunday we get in there, we're backing in, and this guy with 20 years experience backs in and hits another trailer. You know, I just went from crazy to more crazy. And then, you know, we get the loads dropped. We get into Sudbury. We get the freight off there in Sudbury as well. And finally, we get back to Toronto. And the broker that I worked for, he knew I lived in London. So it was a couple hours away. And at that point, I was taking the train up to Toronto to get the truck to take off on the roads and those types of things. And, you know, we're coming back from Sudbury to Toronto, and it's through freezing rain and just crazy, crazy weather. And the broker kind of took pity on me when I came back to Toronto, and he let me use the tractor to drive home after that run. But I just remember just shaking my head, because it was about a 13-day run, when normally Toronto to Vancouver was 6 days, and this was 13 days in a truck with a guy that was illiterate. That, you know, basically by the end of it, I basically wanted to throw his stuff out on the thing and just go and do my run. So that was the crazy trip from hell. 13 days round trip in a truck with somebody that I really couldn't stand. You know, and everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. So, you know, if you're learning how to drive truck, you want to go and drive truck and those types of things, and Janet and other people who are here on the channel will give you all kinds of information about living in a very small space in a truck, and showering in truck stops and those types of things, and communicating with your family. I mean, it's a lot better now than it was in the 1990s, because then it was payphones, trying to live your life on a payphone. Now we have cell phones and social media and those types of things that break down some of the isolation that truck drivers experience, especially over-the-road truck drivers, and that's what I was dealing with. So we'll leave it there today, and again, tomorrow, another live stream at 11 a.m., and we'll tell you the next part of the story in terms of learning how to drive truck and whatnot. Janet, yes, that was definitely the end of Tim and I. Tim and I did not drive truck again, ever again. That was definitely the end of it, especially when he left me in the truck for 5 hours while he went and visited his family in a warm, cozy house drinking cups of coffee. Oh, I was ticked. Yeah. So, yeah, no, we never drove truck again after that. And my days as a teen driver were very short-lived after that. After that, I went to work for a company called Burlington Motor Carriers out of Daleville, Indiana. And that'll be tomorrow's story. Farron, an amazing book. Yeah, I've thought about writing my memoirs, Farron, and maybe we'll do that. So there'll be another live stream tomorrow morning, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, or 6 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, and I'll put that up on the community tab there and put that there. When was the last time you saw Tim? That was the last time I saw Tim. That was 30 years ago, Hall Face. So it hasn't been some time. All right. Okay. So thanks very much for watching. If you're watching on the replay, give it a thumbs up. Hit that like button. Have any questions, send me an email. Drop me a note down in the comments. And we'll definitely help you out. All the best, and have a great day. And remember, pick the best answer, not necessarily the right answer. Bye now.